Question is that this bill be now agreed to in principle. I call the member for Coogee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise to speak in support of the Liquor Amendment 3 Strikes Bill. The issue of alcohol-related violence and antisocial behaviour is a major concern for all people over New South Wales, but it's certainly been a concern of the residents of Coogee for many, many years. More than 40% of all violent crime is alcohol-related, and it's the type of crime that is often quite visible, and it's confronting, and it can affect the lives of innocent people, as we've seen in my seat of Coogee over the last couple of years. During the election campaign, we promised that the New South Wales Liberal government would introduce a range of initiatives which would punish licensed venues that repeatedly flout the law and cause disruption to the neighbourhood. The community has given us a clear message that it has had enough of alcohol-related crime, and that the New South Wales Liberal government is honouring its election commitment by implementing these tough new laws. Now, not all licensed premises have a problem with drunk and violent patrons, and not all venues breach liquor laws. Out of the 14,000 licensed establishments in this state, very few are notorious for violence or overt intoxication. This policy targets those venues that are associated with this unacceptable activity, the venues that repeatedly do break the law under the Liquor Act. As I said before, Mr Speaker, that there's no more effective way to control the management of a rogue venue than the real possibility of it losing its licence. By applying tough sanctions to rogue licensees and problem venues, this government will tackle the problem head-on. The prescribed offences in the new policy are disturbingly quite common. They include a licensee permitting violent conduct on site, selling alcohol to a minor, allowing the sale and the use of illicit drugs, or breaching key liquor licence conditions. Under this policy, venues with a conviction of a serious offence will incur the first strike against their licence. Repeated non-compliance with liquor laws will result in further strikes. So for any licensed premises in New South Wales, a third strike will start to have a severe impact on their business. It will serve as a deterrent to venues and put them on notice to clean up their act. The Director-General will be given some discretion in this process in the event that impropriety is suspected. Importantly, Mr Speaker, this bill espouses responsibility. It highlights the fact that licensees have a responsibility to take action to prevent circumstances which lead to violent conduct of their patrons. They have a real responsibility to their patrons, a responsibility to their community, and a responsibility to abide by the law. It's also a fair policy, Mr Speaker. It only targets the guilty, those that consistently flout the law. It deals with the problems of alcohol-fuelled violence at the source, taking dodgy owners and managers out of the industry. As I said earlier, people in my electorate of Coogee have for years put up with this type of behaviour: drunken antisocial behaviour and low-level crime, vandalisation of both private and public infrastructure. It's often committed from people outside of my electorate, but it has seriously affected the lives of those that live in the electorate of Coogee. I'm particularly encouraged by some of the provisions in the bill, which a strike can be incurred following a conviction for a single serious offence rather than multiple offences, which was previously proposed. So it's even tougher. Trading hours following a second strike can be restricted before 10 a.m. and after 11 p.m, which is consistent with existence disturbance complaints within the Act. Following a second strike, conditions prohibiting liquor sales prior to closure may be imposed, and options are available at the third strike stage include licence suspension for up to 12 months, licence cancellation, and prevention of a licence being granted to the same business operators at the premises for up to 12 months, disqualification of a licence, or the imposition of licence conditions. Tough measures, Mr Speaker. Just in the last couple of years, residents in the Bondi Junction area have formed a residents group with a view to cracking down on alcohol-fuelled antisocial behaviour in the Bondi Junction area. I've met with these residents before, and I'm meeting with them in a couple of weeks' time again. There has been some improvement, but we've still got a long way to go. But it's been an item on the agenda repeatedly for year in, year out of the Coogee Precinct Committee. Back in 2004, when I became Deputy Mayor of Randwick, I started to attend the liquor accord meetings, and I was surprised at the attitude of some of the licensees. They seemed to believe that all the antisocial behaviour and violent drunken behaviour that took place in Coogee was the responsibility of somebody else, that they had no role to play in it. They thought that it was underage drinking. Well, I don't know where the kids got their booze from, and at 3 o'clock in the morning that there were 10 and 12-year-olds out there running amok. The fact is, I went down and had a look at it myself on a couple of occasions. Got there about 1:30 a.m. and stayed till about 4 a.m. and just witnessed for myself what was taking place down there outside the two major venues in the Coogee Basin. And it was quite disturbing. The fact is that whilst one of the pubs had an enviable amount of security on it, the differences in the closing times meant that all of the patrons from one premises migrated a few hundred metres across the road and just caused an enormous ruckus before they turned up at the next pub, and then they were so intoxicated they were turned away and left to fend for themselves at 3 a.m. in the streets of Coogee, which is right at taxi changeover time, and it was just a complete disaster. Now, I must say, in 2008, when I became the Mayor of Randwick, I successfully got the council to adopt a policy of a 1 a.m. lockout for the pubs in Coogee Bay. Now, obviously the council didn't have any control as to whether they could impose this lockout, but the Labor government at the time, later in that year, adopted a watered-down version of my policy, which was a 2 a.m. lockout. But nonetheless, the 2 a.m. lockout has had a dramatic effect on the incidence of loutish behaviour in Coogee, but it's never going to entirely solve the problem on its own. The tough sanctions that are contained in this bill will go a long way to tackling the irresponsible service from rogue venues and the consequent loutish behaviour from drinkers. We have to have a change of culture of behaviour in New South Wales when it comes to alcohol consumption, and that change starts with making drinkers and licensed venues responsible for their own actions. I want to thank the Minister for the amount of work that he has put into this. We're delivering on a commitment, and I look forward to seeing what success it has in managing these venues over the years to come. And I've always believed that alcohol, there is no silver bullet. There's no one action that any government or any local council or any residents' action group can take, or even the publicans can take. It's got to be a combined effort, and we have to be forever vigilant to try to stamp out this sort of behaviour. So I commend the bill to the House.